Alright, so the biggest StarCraft II multiplayer balance patch in years just dropped. If you're a Terran player, I hope you're excited to mass some Cyclones. If you're a Protoss, I hope you're ready to do some Mothership rushes, because I think we're going to see a lot of Cyclones and a lot of Motherships over the next couple of weeks. If you're a Zerg player, I hope you're ready to shed some tears. No, there's some exciting stuff for you too. Okay, so in this video, I want to go over all of the changes that are made to StarCraft II. By the time you're watching this video, all of the servers should be up to date with the most recent StarCraft II balance patch. And honestly, truth be told, I did not expect that some of these changes would make it from the PTR, from the public test realm, to the live version of the game. Because I think a lot of these changes are questionable at best. So I made a video when the PTR was first announced. I think that's about a month and a half, maybe 2 months or so ago at this point. I was pretty excited about the announced changes, but looking back at it and thinking about it a whole lot more ever since, I am not 100% sure about some of these changes. So before I actually jump into all of the announcements, I want to do something that I normally don't do, and that is focus on the negative for just a little bit, okay? So here's the thing, in case you're unfamiliar, just to take a step back, a couple of years ago, Blizzard has essentially outsourced everything StarCraft II related. From the esports side of things to, for example, the balance side of things too. Blizzard has a small group of people that works on all of their classic games, it seems, and StarCraft II gets a tiny portion of that time every once in a while. I know a lot of people meme about the StarCraft II intern. I don't even think there's an intern out there, because that would mean that there's, well, someone out there watching over the intern, and I don't think that's actually the case. I think there's a small group of people working at Blizzard that every once in a while get to spend an hour or two working on StarCraft II. And in order to do that effectively, or at least somewhat effectively to the best of their abilities, they have decided to outsource most of the things that are, well, needing to be done. And one of them is the Balance Council. So the Balance Council is a group of pro players and community members. I'm not part of it personally, but it's a group of people that decide what is best for the game. Overall, I think they have some cool ideas and they've got a pretty good understanding of the game, but I am a little bit concerned with some of these changes too. I think overall the communication with the Balance Council as well as Blizzard has been honestly atrocious. For example, Blizzard did make an announcement of the StarCraft II PTR like a week ago, when it already had been up for like 5 weeks. And in general, everything just moves incredibly slowly. I'm a little concerned that some of the changes in this patch are going to be game breaking and that it will take several months before anything gets fixed. And by then, a lot of people, well, would have lost interest. That would suck because I actually think the previous version of the game, I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it was pretty darn good. One of the very best states of StarCraft II that we've ever seen. And maybe this is going to get even better. I honestly can't really tell. It's going to at least be exciting for the next couple of weeks. But I'm a little concerned for when this patch properly settles in a month or two from now. Secondly, I guess the first part is communication and just the fact that Blizzard is moving very slowly. Secondly, I think the PTR was not tested particularly thoroughly. I know that Wardy ran a little tournament at the very start of the PTR. I think this was like sometime in the middle of August or something along those lines. That is basically the only competitive play that I've seen on this new patch. Most of the pro players will probably have installed the PTR, maybe they practiced a little bit, but obviously if you're playing tournaments all the time, they're going to be running the most current version of the game. So for them it doesn't really make a lot of sense unless there's tournaments being played on the PTR to practice the PTR. So a lot of these changes, they have not been tested. Now obviously, it being available in the live version of the game may very well be the greatest testing it can get, but it is also a little bit risky when there's a lot of people's livelihoods on the line, and if there's obviously no communication with Blizzard and it's going to take months to do any updates, it could certainly backfire. Okay, so that's the negative out of the way. I'll get to some of the negative changes too, okay? I want to focus on something that I've been asking for years that is incredibly positive. Before we go over the actual balance update, this right over here is massive. The updated map pool. So, all of the old maps are out. 9 new maps have been added. Historically speaking, StarCraft II has only ever had 7 maps in the map pool. With this new patch, we now have 9. And I think this is going to especially be awesome in like a half year from now, when maybe the game gets a little bit still again, when the meta settles. I think it's going to be very exciting to see all of the different patches, or sorry, all of the different games rather, being played on this new patch on all of these new maps. Say for example, I mean, we're likely not going to see best of 9s, but say for example, you're playing a best of 5 series, both players will have to veto 2 maps each. And there's going to be a lot of mind games going on. I will make a separate video going over all of these maps as well that I'll probably upload tomorrow. So if you're interested in, well, hearing my thoughts on them, my initial impressions, make sure to subscribe down below so you get notified as soon as that video goes live. Okay, so let's jump into it. Let us start all the way at the very top with what I consider to be the most controversial change overall, and one that I think is actually a little bit risky. Okay, so here's the Cyclone. The Cyclone, it's gone through more changes than any other unit. It'll still be called the Cyclone, it'll look like a Cyclone, it'll behave like a Cyclone, but for all intents and purposes, the unit is entirely different. Okay, so real quick. Cost has been reduced, Tech Lab requirement removed, meaning that you can make 2 at a time from a factory with a reactor. Health has been reduced, armor has been reduced, supply cost has been reduced, the auto attack range has been increased from 5 to 6. Lock-on now uses the Cyclone's auto attack damage and no longer ignores armor. Auto attack upgrades, okay, lock-on cooldown removed, lock-on no longer has a delay before its first shot. The cast range has been reduced from 7 to 6. Max lock-on has been changed from 15 to 9. Multiple Cyclones will now be able to auto-cast lock-on onto the same unit or the same target. The mag field accelerator upgrade has been removed. However, it's now a little bit slower, but there's an upgrade that brings it back to its current speed. Okay. So here's the idea, right? So the rework of the Cyclone to make it into a more all-round unit in all matchup. It aims to increase the viability of mech-based gameplay against Protoss while promoting more engagements with mech-based armies rather. Note the Cyclone will still not auto-cast lock-on on buildings, using its basic attack if no. Okay, cool. The general idea is to make Terran mech a viable option against Protoss. And I am not I'm not convinced that this set of changes will actually make Terran mech viable against Protoss. I may eat my words in a couple of weeks from now, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of Terrans will still be favoring a bio-based style instead, just because Protoss has a lot of good answers against mech as it is. If that so happens to be the case, this is a very significant change for the Terran versus Zerg matchup, where it really wasn't intended to be a change, right? Because the Cyclone will be substantially better against Zerg. All of the games where I have seen Terran go up against Zerg from, for example, the Balanced Tournament, the PTR tournament that Wardy ran, the Cyclone seemed very overtuned. As a matter of fact, I don't think a single, don't quote me on that, but I don't think a single Zerg player won a series against Terran in that tournament. I think the finals was Solar versus Clem. I think Clem won 3-0. Anyways, long story short, this is a very significant change that is intended to make mech viable against Protoss, but I'm not entirely sure if that will actually happen. Because of units like the Stalker, the Immortal, the Void Relic. There's a lot of good options available for Protoss that, you know, can shut down Terran mech. Maybe it will make it viable against mech, or against Protoss, I suppose, but if that were to be the case, I think it's going to be pretty oppressive as well. I think this is really going to impact Terran versus Zerg significantly, and I'm not convinced that it will be in a positive way. That being said, obviously this set of changes is going to require thorough testing. It'll probably be at least like half a year or so until we understand the full implications of this, because this is basically an entirely new unit. I think it's a questionable change, and while it could work out favorably for the game overall, I think for the foreseeable future we're going to see mass Cyclone in basically every single game. I hope I'm wrong, but maybe not. I don't know. If that turns out to be the case, I hope that Blizzard does decide to patch the game again, but I'm a little afraid that like there's going to have to be a decision made by the Balance Council, which is going to take like a month, and then they have to communicate that with Blizzard, and then Blizzard has to have a moment to actually implement it, and it's going to be like 3 months until any changes are made. I hope that's not the case, but I'm a little bit concerned that that will be the case. So, long story short, I think it sounds like this is awesome against Zerg. I don't think the unit is going to be that useful against Protoss overall. I actually expected the Cyclone change to be reverted entirely and that this was not going to go live in the game, but maybe it is. I honestly didn't mind the previous version of the Cyclone at all. Like, we've been seeing it again a little bit as of late. I've casted a bunch of those games as well, and it honestly seemed pretty good. Something that still needed to be explored maybe a bit more, but... For example, I casted that series of Special going up against Nice, and Cyclones in combination with missile turrets, I mean, it's not really something we've seen before, really ever. Not that I remember anyways, and it seemed like a viable choice. Maybe it's still going to be a viable choice and it will just be better overall. I'm not sure, but we'll have to see. Okay, so a change that everybody agrees with. The Ghost. The Ghost in general carries too much strength. I think everybody agrees with that. So they've decided to change the snipe damage. It's been reduced from 170 to 130, plus 40 versus psionic. So certain spellcasters will still get one shot or two shot. And the EMP radius has been reduced from 175 to 1.5. Okay. I personally would have rather seen not a damage reduction to the Ghost, but a survivability reduction instead. Because essentially the Ghost is a spellcaster, and all of the other spellcasters in StarCraft II are pretty vulnerable units, like, for example, the Infestor, or, for example, the Viper, or the High Templar, or whatever, right? Maybe the Queen, not so much. The Queen, I guess, is pretty beefy. Anyways, I think the Ghost generally has a lot of, HP and a lot of sustain, and I think I would have rather seen a nerf to that. But overall, I definitely agree with nerfing the Ghost. I think that's a great idea. So the idea of, the intention at least, behind reducing the EMP radius is to make it a lot more viable for Protoss to go for High Templar-based openers. High Templar-based openers are not very popular in the previous meta of StarCraft II, mostly because of the Ghost. I think this will definitely make it a little bit more viable, because reducing the radius of EMP also effectively reduces the range of it, right? Because oftentimes you throw the EMP circle on the floor to see how far you can go, and then you try to line up the High Templar with the absolute maximum range. This will, force the Ghost to be in a more vulnerable position. So Snipe will no longer one-shot units such as Zealot and Roaches. I mean, you shouldn't really... Like, if there's an instance where you have Snipe against Roaches, I think you're pretty happy as Terran anyways. It is mostly going to be significant, this change over here, to the Ultra. I believe in the past it took 3 snipes to kill an Ultralisk, now it will take 4. So Ghost nerf, I think everybody can agree with that. It definitely does make a significant change. Widowmine. This is probably the most discussed change on Reddit. I've seen tons of memes for this. Drilling Claws now also makes the Widowmine unburrow twice as fast. Now, this is by no means the biggest change, but why? Who's out there advocating for a Widowmine buff? I guess the idea is that the mid-game for Terran is going to be a little bit more action-packed, but I feel like it's already incredibly action-packed. It's going to make the Widowmine more microable, which I honestly don't think I agree with. I actually think this is a mistake and should not be in the game as it is. A lot of people have been calling for Widowmine nerfs. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but small things like, for example, only allowing, well, this is relatively small for Terran versus Zerg, but big in Terran versus Protoss, only allowing like 2 Widowmines in a metavec rather than 4, I think would be a cool test to have in the game. As it is right now, this is a Widowmine buff, and I don't think that anybody really asked for that, other than Terran players out there. But yeah, I just don't see why this was necessary. So it returns some of the strength to active Widowmine micro in the mid-game versus Zerg that was lost. I see so many Widowmines do so much damage all the time. I really don't believe that it needed a buff, but fair enough. Especially with the Baneling changes that we'll get to in a moment. I'm a little concerned that this is going to be very oppressive, but I guess we'll see. Metavec, pretty much a useless change. So the speed upgrade has been replaced with the Caduceus reactor upgrade. It increases the Metavec's energy regeneration rate, fair enough. Upgraded from the fusion core. The minimap radius has been increased as well. This is, I think, mostly for Protosses. I don't see any Zergs complaining that they don't see Metavecs on the minimap, but I guess that makes it more in line with some of the other units out there. This upgrade over here, it increases the Metavec's energy regeneration rate. There will be games where this will be played, I'm sure. I just don't see how this is going to have any impact in any competitive game of StarCraft II ever. Maybe there will at some point be a game, and you can quote me on that in like a year from now. You can link me the game where this actually made a difference, but I still don't see a lot of people making great use of that, but fair enough. I guess it'll be helpful. I mean, it'll be good. Yeah, allows a little bit more active play, I guess. Okay, this is a big one. Right over here, the Raven. Love this change, personally. The interference matrix, so the ability that allows you to disable enemy units temporarily, it now requires a research for 50 minerals, 50 gas, and for about a minute. So that's pretty cheap. Obviously, the time investment is significant. It's research at the starport's tech lab, meaning that you need to keep the tech lab on the starport for quite a while. This means that it doesn't really affect Terran versus Terran, but it does affect Terran versus Protoss significantly. So a lot of Protoss players are now going up against Terrans who make a Raven to be safe against a lot of Protoss openers, and then they can also use the Raven to temporarily disable 2 Colossi, which is like the entire buildup of the early game for Protoss. I always thought that was a bit silly, so now a Raven can still do that, but you need to spend a little bit more commitment to the Raven by researching the upgrade as well. I think this is an excellent change. I've always thought it was kind of silly that you could trade out a little bit of Raven energy to disable 2 Colossi. I think this is an excellent change. This one over here is in addition to the previous set of changes they announced, so I don't think this was in my original PTR video. The Hellbat, the damage bonus per upgrade has been reduced from +2 and +1 versus light to just +2. This means that with +3 and Infernal Pre-Igniter, Hellbats will no longer one-shot Zerglings. So in the current version, or I guess technically the previous version of the game, Hellbats absolutely demolished Zerglings in the late game. Now they're not going to be able to do so anymore, which I think is a really good change. Overall, Zerglings, as soon as Blue Flame Hellbats are out, are only really used in run-bys. And they're still helpful there, but I still don't know if you want to jump Blue Flame Hellbats with Zerglings in the late game, but at least it's slightly more viable. Okay. That's the changes for the Terran right over here. The questionable one over there, in my mind, is the Cyclone change. We'll have to see how that plays out, but overall, I like these changes quite a bit. I think the Widowmine change is dumb, though. I really don't understand. Like, this is kind of like, this reminds me a lot of that Liberator change from the most recent patch before this one, where like the Liberator suddenly was made a bit cheaper. I feel like in the Balance Council, there's a couple of Terrans that are like, yo, you're changing all of this. Where are you going to compensate me? And they're like, well, Widowmines, Liberator. I don't know. Yeah, I find this change very questionable. It's unnecessary. I don't think it'll be very impactful at all, but maybe I'm wrong and this is going to make this an even more oppressive unit than it already is. Okay, Zerg. First change, I think it's an excellent choice. The Adaptive Talents movement speed bonus has been removed. So Adaptive Talents is the burrow improvement for the Lurker. It's a siege unit in my mind. Siege units should not be able to reposition super quickly. I think this is a great change, at least from like a gameplay point of view. It may very well be significant in actual gameplay, but now you have to like be a little bit more strategic with where you position them because adjusting it is not great. The cost has been reduced as well. Fair enough. Infestor change. This one still surprises me a little bit. This is overall definitely a nerf. So the fungal growth cast range has been reduced, the fungal growth damage has been reduced, the Infestor starting energy, however, has been increased, and the pathogen glance upgrade, which is the energy improvement for the Infestor, has been removed. This will make that step from Lair Tech to Hive Tech easier, because you can just make like 2 Infestors and survive a lot of pushes, but it's gonna make the Infestor quite a bit weaker in the later stages of the game. I think spellcasters should be supplemental units. So you add on a couple of them and then make your army better with them. There's a lot of games that at least we used to see where you would go mass infestor. And I think we're going to see less of that because the fungal cast range has been reduced significantly. I think this is probably made in a response to the EMP radius reduction. But I'm still not 100% sure. Like, I think in the community of StarCraft II, at least on Reddit, I see a lot of people discussing that Zerg is too strong against Terran. I actually think the previous balance of Terran versus Zerg was really good. A lot of the balance could be written up to the map designs. And this is really going to be quite significant, especially with the Broodlord change that we'll get to in just a little bit. Yeah, this is definitely going to be significant at the pro level in the ultimate late game. I think it'll be nice, though, in the mid-game of StarCraft II, but after that, it'll be a clear nerf. Viper. Another useless change. I don't see how this is ever going to affect anybody. So the Viper, this was also discussed, by the way, on Reddit quite a bit, I saw. I don't even know if people were serious about it, because it really did not seem like a significant change to me. And honestly, I don't think you're going to even notice it. But the consume damage, so when you're consuming a structure to get energy on your Viper, it's been reduced from 200 to 150. So the idea is that it reduces the attention required for gathering Viper energy. Okay, so this affects, in my mind, literally nobody. Did pro gamers ever accidentally eat their structures with the consume? I guess. It's happened once or twice, but then never again. Is this gonna allow Diamond League players to make Vipers? No. The reason why the Viper is usually not made at the lower levels of StarCraft, well, not the lower levels of StarCraft II, that's not even fair. Below the pro level, we very rarely see correct Viper play, is because the unit is, like, I can't play the unit personally, like, particularly well either. It's so vulnerable. It just dies so easily, right? So if you want to buff the Viper and not have it affect the pro level, I don't think you should change the consume damage. I think you should do something similar to the Viper as they did all those years ago to the High Templar, and give it an auto attack that makes it not wander into the enemy's army if you accidentally overextend, because it'll stay at a little bit of range. I find this change laughable at best, completely irrelevant. Like, some people are calling this a Viper buff. I mean, I don't think, if they didn't write this down and they, like, changed, nobody would have noticed. I don't think anybody would have ever noticed. All right, the Brute Lord. Movement speed increased from 224 to 262. It's still very slow if you compare it to other units in the late game. The Bruteling movement speed has been reduced, the Bruteling health has been reduced, and the Bruteling attack speed has been reduced as well. So the idea is to make the Brute Lord more like a Brute War Guardian. But honestly, playing around with this a little bit, it doesn't make it a Brute War Guardian. It just makes it a bad unit overall. I think the Bruteling changes are very substantial for late game Terran versus Zerg. Because you never are going to make mass Brute Lord just by themselves. They still need some sort of supportive unit, and usually that's the Infestor, but the range has been reduced from the Infestor. In like a straight up battle between Brute Lords and Thors, really your only saving grace as Zerg was the Bruteling, hopefully derping out the pathing of the Thor a little bit. This makes it so that the Thor will have a much easier, like, especially if there's Blue Flame Hellbats in the mix. The damage there is not going to affect anything. The damage changes there. I'm a little concerned that this is actually, all things considered, a Brute Lord nerf. The buff over here to the movement speed really does not make up anything for it. It's not going to allow you to really use the Brute Lord more aggressively, and it's really not going to allow you to use it more effectively defensively either. So, yeah, there's already a lot of counters to the Brute Lord, and I don't think this makes it much better. Yeah. Overlord change over here. First change I really do quite like. So the deceleration speed increased from 149 to 228. Reduce the amount of time it takes for Overlords to stop and begin dropping creep. Okay. Generate creep delay has been reduced from 143 to 1.07. Oh, actually. Okay, I thought they also changed the movement speed for the slow drop alert. Maybe that's over here, actually. Ah, yeah, there it is. Movement speed increased from 0.9 to 1.09. Like, this is completely pointless. Doesn't do anything. Okay, yeah, so this I think is cool. The transport changes over here, maybe. Okay, so you're basically going to be able to micro your Overlords a little bit better, and I guess it's going to make Queen drops slightly better. But I don't think this really is going to make a super significant change, especially this over here. Completely pointless. Movement speed with pneumatized carapace has been increased by about 10% as well, though, so that's kind of nice. The Overlord speed upgrade is not something we see that often. And now I guess it'll make the Overlord a little bit better. But, like, normally the reason you get Overlord speed is to scout the opponent. And with the previous version of the Overlord, you could already scout the opponent very effectively. The reason a lot of players don't get it is because it's expensive. So increasing the speed, I guess it'll make Overlord play with Queen drops and whatnot a little bit better. And they're going to be slightly more microable. But it's all very, very minor. I mean, it's neat, don't get me wrong. It is definitely neat, but I don't think it's as significant as some of the previous changes, and definitely not as significant as some of the community members are talking about. Again, maybe I'll eat my words in a few weeks from now, but I don't think so. Ultralisk, another change that is a buff, but very insignificant. So first off, the burrow/unburrow time reduced. Okay, cool, I guess, maybe. And the cost has been reduced from 300, 200 to 275, 200. So this is a 25 mineral cheaper unit now. That means that for the price of an Ultralisk, you can now get one extra Zergling. I still don't see a lot of people playing Ultras. I still don't think it's going to be a particularly good unit. The Ghost change, honestly, with the snipe requiring one additional snipe, is significantly bigger than, well, this over here. And maybe it'll be nice overall. But yeah, I mean, it's a buff. maybe it'll be slightly better. Lurkers and Brute Lords are generally favored over Ultras in the late game. Yeah, Lurkers in particular. So Lurkers are getting nerfed. Brute Lords, honestly, I think overall are a little bit nerfed too. The movement speed, I guess, is nice, but the situations where they're good, they're not going to be as good anymore, so yeah. Generally favored over Ultras in late game, as Ultras have a poor cost efficiency over time. Should make them used throughout long games while not greatly reducing the initial investment. Fair enough. I think overall the Ultra has a lot of counters, and it's just making it tricky to get much done. Okay, Hydra change over here. So this is also something that is changed compared to the original patch that they initially announced. In the initial announcement of this PTR, they had these upgrades merged together in one upgrade. That's no longer the case. So the upgrades are still split. However, the research time has been reduced for the speed upgrade, and the range upgrade has been its cost reduced and also its speed. So it's a bit easier to get. This was also always a little bit awkward, because say you wanted to go for a Hydra den and you wanted to go for a Hive and you wanted to go into Lurkers, you could literally get the Hive faster than you could get both of the Hydra upgrades. And by the time you get up to Hive, you may as well make Lurkers, if that makes any sense. So you really only make Hydras defensively usually as Zerg to go into Lurkers eventually. Nobody's really doing Hydralisk timings, and I got a little excited when I first saw the upgrades being merged back together, because that would meant the reintroduction of Hydra timings. This means that Hydra timings are not a particularly great choice, but I mean, it is going to make the unit obviously a little bit cheaper overall. A lot of the things here for Zerg make everything a little bit cheaper and everything a little bit more massable, which if you want to play a swarmy style is really cool. However, this is my main concern right over here, and something that is going to be incredibly impactful. The Baneling. And this is something I'm concerned for, actually. So the damage bonus has been reduced from +2 versus light on top of that, to just +2. Centrifugal hooks cost has been reduced from 150 to 100, okay? Centrifugal hooks research time has been reduced by 8 seconds, okay? And then the health bonus has been removed. These two over here in the middle, honestly, mostly irrelevant. I want to focus here on the damage reduction and the health bonus reduction. This is massive, okay? So first off, this means that it will no longer be able to one-shot probes for Protoss with +2. Excellent change, I really like that. My concern is not so much against Protoss, although obviously it may very well make a significant change there too. Obviously it will against, like, you know, that macro-based army. But again, I am mostly concerned here against bio-based units. So say the Terran versus Zerg matchup. Zergs literally make hundreds of Banelings every single game because it's their best unit to make. And now a lot more of them will die before they hit their target. It's gonna take Marines and one less hit to be able to kill it. It's gonna allow like units that deal splash damage, like the Planetary Fortress and the Siege Tank, you know, that like, deal splash damage in a circle, and then like towards the outer parts of the circle, it deals less damage. Those units are gonna be able to kill Banelings significantly better. Do any of the previous buffs that we've seen over here make up for that Baneling nerf? I don't think so. I actually think that the health reduction over here is super big. I agree that one-shotting probes was a bit much, but I don't see what's making up for this Baneling. So here's the reason, right? So the reason why we see Zerg versus Terran, in that matchup we see Zerg players focus heavily on making mass Baneling, because they try to kill the Terran before they get to the late game. Because the pro-level Zergs, they seem to be convinced that they can't really win against Terran in a split map scenario and in the late game in general. That's the reason why they are making so many Banelings. So there are some very small improvements, I guess, to like the Brute Lord, maybe, and the Ultra, sure. Lurker got a nerf, however. Infestor got a nerf. I mean, there's a Viper buff though, I guess, the consume damage. Irrelevant. I'm a little concerned for these set of changes here for the Zerg overall. Now, obviously, like I said, the perception for a lot of players is that Zerg is a little overtuned, and that may very well be the case. In my mind, it really only is, like, Serral. In my mind, Serral is a little bit overtuned, and, you know, he's a statistical outlier. When I play ladder, personally, I rarely face a Zerg. Grandmaster League in general right now has a small handful of Zergs at the top, and basically everything is Terran and Protoss. I feel like this is going to make things so much harder, and that is not even really talking yet about, obviously, the Cyclone change, right? Like, Generally against Cyclones, maybe you wouldn't want to go Banelings, but that is one of the styles that a lot of players used to do back in the day. They would go like 100 drones and just try and flood the map with as much stuff as possible to try and like soft contain. Like, that's not going to be a great option anymore either. I mean, maybe it's not going to make much of a difference there, actually. But the health, yeah. Units are just going to die much easier. So every single one of the Banes you're going to see moving forward right now is going to be a little bit weaker. And only time will tell if this is going to be substantial. But I think it probably will be. Okay, so the air changes or the upgrade changes are a little bit different. Fair enough. Evo Chamber also is now a little bit better overall, I guess. But really, again, nothing all too significant. Especially since Protoss is getting the exact same thing over here. Okay. So, yeah, I think I've discussed it pretty clearly here. I'm a little concerned about some of these Zerg changes. Now, if the goal is to nerf Zerg, I think they've been pretty successful. But I am not sure if they should. But I say this as somebody who plays Zerg primarily myself. I try to be unbiased when I make these videos, but obviously I'm not going to be 100% unbiased. But I try my best. Cybercore also, by the way, has got his upgrade cost adjusted to everything else. Fair enough. Okay. War Prism, minimap radius increased. Fair enough, cool. Disruptor. This is a big point of discussion. In the late game, much like Zerg, Protoss doesn't really like playing against Terran. So they don't really like playing against Terran in the late game. Early game PvT, the adjustments to, for example, the Raven, and I guess a little bit later on into the game with the Ghost, super significant changes for Protoss that are very good for Protoss. This, however, over here is an interesting one. So the supply cost of the Disruptor has been increased from 3 to 4. The radius has been increased from 0.5 to 6.2, fair enough. And the model has been reduced in size by 9%. So the idea is to reduce the power of Mass Disruptor in the mid to late game versus Terran without significantly affecting the ability to build Disruptors early for pressure builds or defending against enemy aggression. This is a nerf to the Disruptor. I agree that massing Disruptors is a bit stupid because the Disruptor feels like a spellcaster, but it also feels like one of the very few choices that Protoss really has against Terran. So I guess we'll get to that in a moment. The Tempest, the acceleration has been increased from 2.1 to 4.2, and the radius has been, well, the radius and the model scale has been reduced by 10%. So this makes the Tempest a little bit more microable. I guess this is to make up for the Disruptor change, because a lot of Terrans will be going into Mass Liberator and whatnot, right? And then the Tempest should be a little bit better overall. The Tempest still has a clear trade-off where it is going to be pretty vulnerable and honestly a pretty trash unit overall. So yeah, I think it's still, it's not going to make the Tempest too powerful, whatever. It's going to make it more microable and just a little bit better overall. One concern I have seen popping up, and this may very well be legit. Hard to say, especially with the Cyclone change. Remember those builds we used to see like a couple years ago where the Protoss player would proxy Void Rays with shield batteries at the bottom of the Terran's main, and then they would transition towards Tempest eventually? One of the ways you would stop that was with Cyclones. So the Cyclone is an entirely different unit. Hard to say how that interaction is going to play out. And now obviously the Tempest will be a lot more microable as well. It could bring that cheese back, which I would find kind of cool, but I can also imagine that a lot of Terran players are listening to this and they're like, I don't want to play against that ever again. The Mothership. Here's a pretty big one. Cost has been reduced. So these are all adjustments to the original set of PTR changes. The cost has been reduced from 400, 400 to 300, 300. Supply cost has been reduced. The build time has been reduced. The speed has been increased. And the lateral acceleration, that's the turning radius and whatnot, the micro ability, so to say, of the unit, has been increased as well. In the community of StarCraft, so this is kind of interesting to me. This has been... Yeah, there's a lot more, I was going to say. Yeah, this is not everything. It's been all perceived as a buff to the Mothership, but I actually kind of feel like at the pro level, this may very well be a slight nerf. All of the changes are going to make the unit better for Protoss players that put all of their units on one big control group. If you, however, have ever played a game against a Protoss player before who has microed their Motherships very well, I don't think you would ever call it a unit that is too weak. It's one of those units that most players don't get enough value out of because they're not microing it correctly. I really feel like the current version, or I guess the previous version of the Mothership now, was probably slightly better than this, but overall considered, yeah, all of these changes are considered to be a buff for Protoss players that just put this on the same control group as the rest of their army, which is fair enough. So the health has been reduced, the radius skill has been reduced as well. It no longer has energy, so the spells are now cooldown based. Recall has an 89-second cooldown. Recall radius has been reduced. Time warp now has a 60-second cooldown. The slow has been reduced from 50 to 40%, so that's movement speed and attack speed. Time warp radius has been reduced. The time warp cast delay has been reduced as well. The cloak field is no longer passive. It is now an activated ability, which lasts for 20 seconds with a 50-second cooldown. This over here is the reason why I think overall this is a nerf. It's going to make it much better for Zerg in particular to start fishing. So one of the reasons why the Mothership got abducted so frequently is because it was the only unit that Zerg players could see. It's not like necessarily they wanted to kill the Mothership first and foremost. It was just simply the only unit they could see because everything else was cloaked underneath. This is going to make it easier to abduct units that aren't the Mothership as well. And I still think that's, yeah, overall going to make a lot more of an interactive playstyle. So I really do like this change. Obviously, because of all of those changes and the build time and the cost and all that, it's going to be much easier to rush. The unit will hit the battlefield significantly easier, and I think there's going to probably be some crazy timing attacks that Protoss players will cook up over the next few weeks that are going to allow the Mothership to really be powerful. But I think in the ultimate late game, it'll be slightly weaker overall. Obviously, the recall is kind of cool. Like, you can already do that, obviously, but you could recall one side of the map straight to the other side and then use the Nexus as well, since they don't share the cooldown. Recall radius, however, has been reduced, so might be a little bit tricky. I think this will be a lot of fun, but in an odd way, I am convinced that this is a buff for players below the pro level and a slight nerf for players at the pro level. Which is not necessarily what the goal was, I don't think. But it's going to be fun to see anyways how this plays out. The sentry change. Guardian shield has been reduced, or increased rather, from 10.1 or 10.7 to 12.8. Honestly, a meaningless change. Doesn't make any difference. I guess it'll last a little bit longer, fair enough. It allows the Guardian shield to be precast before engaging Terran armies. Sure. Maybe. I don't know. I don't see how this is going to affect much of anything. We've had a lot of these meaningless sentry buffs over the years. Yeah, sure, fair. Like, it's gotten like a dozen buffs over the years, but it still feels like the same unit as it was in like 2015, okay? It really doesn't make much of a difference. Another one that is kind of nice, I guess, but also irrelevant for the most part. The Stasis Ward sight range has been increased. Cool. Barrier will no longer, for the Immortal, this is a pretty significant one, the barrier will now also block the first instance of damage, which triggers the barrier. So this is going to make, yeah, certain bits of damage significantly easier to hold, and it's a slight buff to the Immortal for sure. So it counts towards the 100 damage blocked by the barrier. Currently, EMP hitting an Immortal will drain all of the Immortal shields as well as activating the barrier, right? So that's no longer going to be the case, and it's going to make the Immortal a better choice overall. For Protoss against Terran. And obviously against, it helps against Zerg too, but usually things like a Roach or a Zergling will trigger the Immortal barrier. The Void Ray fixed an issue where the movement speed of the Void Ray with Flux Vanes while Prismatic Alignment was active was 2.62 instead of 2.89. Okay, bug fix. And that's really about it. By the way, there's also some new 2v2, 3v3, and 4v4 maps. Some of these are, maybe all of them actually, are from old map pools for StarCraft II. But if you are a team game player, it's going to be a little bit, yeah, nicer now to play because you're not playing on the same maps that have been around for a very long time. Okay, so overall, I'm excited for this patch because I think there's going to be a lot of room for new experimentation and new build orders that we haven't seen before in the past, and it's always a lot of fun whenever new maps come out and new balance changes and whatnot are introduced, because, well, as a fan of StarCraft and as a viewer, I think you're gonna really get a kick out of some of the new strats. However, I'm also a little concerned for some of those changes, and like I already voiced earlier, if some of these things turn out to be broken, I think most notably the Cyclone, I hope Blizzard is ready to react and adjust, but I'm a little bit concerned that they will not be. Okay, so, real quick. If the goal for this patch was to make Zerg versus Terran more Terran favored, I think this patch achieves it. The Baneling nerf alone already makes up for a very significant portion of that. If the goal for this patch was to make ZVP more Protoss favored, I think the patch also achieves that a little bit. Main reason there is, again, the Baneling nerf. I think the Baneling nerf really is a very significant one. We'll have to see how all of the changes, though, affect it. If the goal of this patch was to make early game PvT more Protoss favored, I think the patch achieves that as well. So this is most notable, of course, for the Ghost change, but also to the Raven change. It's gonna maybe make High Templar and Colossus-based openers a little bit more viable. But late game Terran, I think it's still gonna be pretty oppressive in all of the matchups. Now, obviously, early game in StarCraft II does steamroll to an advantage generally. So if you're, at an advantage after the early game, which Protoss may very well find themselves in more frequently now moving forward, they will also have a stronger mid game and therefore a stronger late game. But yeah, I'm excited for these changes. But overall, I think it's a pretty significant nerf for Zerg. And I think I would like it a whole lot better. And maybe this is such a small thing, and it's really not even going to be that noticeable in a game. But I think I would like this patch a whole lot better if this change was not part of the game. Centrifugal Hook's health bonus removed. It's just a few hit points on the Baneling, but it makes such a world of difference.